What if you didn't have to be a marketer to be brilliant at marketing? Hey, you, I'm Sarah Grace, CEO of Victress Global. Look, the world is marketing to women using masculine strategies, and it does not work. Using my unique V2 marketing system, I've been able to help so many entrepreneurs escape slimy, salesy marketing strategies, spend less time at the computer, and grow their businesses in a way that lets them take Fridays off. No joke. So stick around. I'll make sure you know exactly how to tackle marketing in a way that feels awesome. And P.S. Some of these episodes come from live trainings inside my private Facebook group. Search for V2 Marketing on Facebook, and you can join me live every single week. Let's rock and roll. Hey everybody, how is it going? It is Sarah Allred in the V2 Marketing Group, and gosh, do I have a treat for you today. You guys never had dudes inside our V2 Marketing Group today, except for the past 2 weeks, okay? We had a dude here last week, amazing, and of course, the second person I'm gonna bring in here is gonna be the amazing Liam Leonard. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here, and what an honor.
Oh, it's so fun. This is such a great crew of women, and women who are dreaming big, really are working towards big things, are setting up big things, who are solid in their faith, solid in their desire to, have family time and days at the pool over the summer. And here we are, my kid's last day of school is literally tomorrow. So
Nice.
Many of these women here in the room may feel like, oh my gosh, my whole world is about to not crash down, but change dramatically. And if you're watching this live, you can see Liam's eyes go up because he gets this, okay? With summertime approaching, things just change. And I felt so honored about a month ago to sit in the same room as you for an interview with you. And I was so amazed at your sensitivity to prioritizing family and business. That was an actual pull for you to make some pretty dramatic steps in your career. I would call it a career. It's probably the term for it. That I just was like, I have to get him in front of my people because they get this. They are trying to balance big dreams, big goals financially, big impact in the world, and they've got kids sitting on their laps literally as they are watching you and I here today. So let me introduce Liam to you guys really quickly, and then we are going to waste no time, okay? Because summer is starting literally tomorrow for me. So we're not going to waste any time. We're going to dive into his story, and we're going to talk a lot about some financial foundations. We're going to talk a lot about some moral, ethical foundations, family foundations that Liam has experienced firsthand, and it's going to be great. So as you know, in my introductions, I love to introduce the people that I am with in the most uncharacteristic way, meaning how do I just know them? Like, how do I know them? I could read his bio all day. I will send you the link on LinkedIn so you can connect with him. But the reality is I am new friends with Liam. And we sat together about a month ago and had a conversation, and I was simply blown away by a couple of things. Number one, he is not sleazy when he offers things to people. He is not slimy. He is not salesy. He is chock full of integrity, which is the name of the game of how we play here in V2 Marketing. And so I was really impressed just with his demeanor that way. And second, he is a risk taker in all the right ways. I was just mesmerized by his story of leaving security, leaving probably benefits in a 401k, leaving a big corporate job, corporate opportunities, I'm sure really cool corporate parties, all in the name of really family and health. And so Liam, I'm so glad that you're here. And it's like the worst introduction ever. It has, simply because it doesn't talk about the amazing things you've done, but can we just dive in with your world?
Let's do it. And I think it was great, right? The things that I value most are family and integrity, and that's how you introduced me. And there's no better way to be introduced than that.
And we didn't prepare for that. We didn't prepare. Sweet. Okay, so Liam is the man of family and integrity. Will you just walk us through your story, the one that you told me earlier on about what you left, what was going on, and just get us started?
Yeah. So I'll go way back to give kind of some context, right? I grew up in a household. My dad immigrated from Hong Kong. My mom has been here for a long time, military brat. I bring that up to say, basically tiger parents, right? So anything that you've seen on tiger parents, helicopter parents, nothing but the best is acceptable. That was my parents. And so, an A- wasn't good enough because it just wasn't up to what I was capable of. And I excelled in a lot of things growing up. And so I ended up going to Yale. I played soccer at Yale. I played soccer for the youth national team. I got a degree in economics. And from there, I worked for Nestle. I started in procurement, ended up running a division for North and South America on the procurement side. Then I wanted to get into marketing. So I went over to marketing. I worked in Hispanic brands, used that, got into innovation over at Pepsi. Got my MBA part-time from Anderson in finance and real estate. And from there, I moved into a leadership program with T-Mobile, where I ran a call center, I ran a sales region, I ran the accessory business, and then I reached a crossroad. So up until that point, I got promoted every 9 to 15 months. I was moving all throughout the country. Well, even more, right? Internationally as well when I was at Nestle. And everything was driven to being a multinational CEO, right? And so my upbringing and my persona was all driven by you got to be the best. I speak Chinese, I speak Spanish, and wanting to leverage those, wanting to be in a global community. It was all about leading a Fortune 100 multinational company. That's the direction I was headed and the path I was on, and was in a really good place to achieve that.
Okay, so this is so funny because is everybody kind of like, wow, he's awesome. Okay, he's done awesome things. Why would he ever, like, he's doing what he wanted to do. He's doing what he set out to do. I'm picturing Nestle, I'm picturing Pepsi. These are not startups. These are massive corporations. And you could be sailing on a yacht somewhere in Santa Barbara or whatever, wherever those yachts belong. And I think the pivotal moment in the story is that I know that you have left that. I know that you have exited that world, and it blows my mind because there are a lot of really cool things about that world that seem so appealing, especially when you are part of a startup or you are, aiming to get your first $1,000 in sales, for crying out loud, as an entrepreneur. So what was the moment, or what was the time span when you were like, I am out?
Yeah. So that first part that I gave on my background, typically never provide, right? To me, I'm very humble, understated, and yes, I've got a lot of accomplishments, but that's not what defines me, and that's not what I bring to the table, right? So while I rattled it off smiling, just know that's not typically, right, things that ever come up. And why it never comes up, right, is there was a lot of pain and a lot of sacrifice to achieve a lot of those different things. So when I mentioned I played soccer for the youth national team, for instance, a couple tournaments, one in Italy, and then I represented the US down in Brazil. I lived in LA, and I traveled down to San Juan Capistrano, which is just north of San Diego, every Saturday and Sunday for basically my entire childhood, right? You couple that with getting perfect grades, because that's the only thing that was acceptable. I basically had no time, right? Those were the two things that I was preparing for, right? Great academics to help me get into a great school, and soccer because it was a passion and I was really good at it.
So I'm going to interrupt you, as a rude podcast host will do. Did you know at the time as a child and in college and those things that you didn't have time? Like, did you feel smothered at the time, or is this all in retrospect?
It's all in retrospect, right? Growing up, because nothing but the best was acceptable, I had to win, and I wanted almost everything. And if I didn't win at something, I didn't do it, right? So I never did any sort of creative stuff because it just wasn't the way my mind was wired, right? I'm logic, I'm numbers, I'm not emotional. I followed my dad's model for me in that regard, which was very much a statesman, a diplomat, right? Like, show no emotion, be even keel.
Interesting.
Has served me really well in certain capacities, but has been held me back hugely in a lot of other areas, right? That I recognize now, didn't have a clue then. So to your question, no, because I was winning, right?
Because you were winning. So you were finding identity through that I'm good enough to win. I'm a winner.
Winning equaled success. Success equaled approval, right? Approval equaled love. And I can articulate that now. I had no idea in the moment, right? But if nothing but the best was acceptable, how could I go back to my parents and say, I didn't win, right? Or I didn't achieve the best that I could, right? Like it wasn't something that crossed my mind, right? And so as a result, just poured in everything, right, to make sure that I was successful and could achieve. Fortunately, I had, the things within myself that God had provided me to do those things, right? I can't imagine a world where I wasn't capable of what they expected. Like that's a whole nother thought I've never even contemplated, but that's a scary childhood for me. And one that I was able to avoid, right? But so the sacrifice piece, right? So a lot of that started in childhood, right? Once I got to university, I kind of relaxed a little bit, didn't care as much about grades, had a good time with soccer, and kind of looked to the next step. And that was the first time that I was starting to craft my own identity, right? Outside of my parents. But then as soon as I got into workforce, right, it was, the path was very clear to me, right? It was like, okay, how do I get promoted? What's required? What do I need to show? What results, right? It's like, okay, here's what you need to do, right? Check,
just continuing what you knew.
Continuing what I knew, right? And so I moved super rapidly, right? In terms of what that looked like, right? Like I was managing all of North and South America for my component, right, within 18 months of starting my career, right? Which is just absurd, right? I went down, and part of it was because I was willing to move, right? I wasn't tied to a location. So I lived in Brazil, I lived in Mexico, I lived in Peru, right? And I spoke the language, right? And so that allowed me to have these tremendous opportunities, right? And that was an intersection of skill and opportunity. And I jumped every single time those things came up. And so started pursuing that. And my wife today is my high school girlfriend. So we've been together for a long, long time, but she's 2 years younger than I am. So when I was in my first 2 years, she was still in school, and it was like, it didn't matter, right? Like just go. The only thing that mattered was moving the career, right? So move the career. Eventually, what came up was, hey, in order to get to marketing, you need an MBA. I was like, okay. So I applied to the MBA programs. I knew I wanted to go part-time because I didn't want to step away or slow down the career growth. So that meant I applied basically to UCLA and USC. Got into both, went to UCLA because it had a better ranking. And what that meant is I went to the part-time program every Saturday for 3 years. I gave up. And then Sunday was essentially homework. So my weekends were gone for 3 years.
Sounding like your childhood.
It's what I knew, right? And
it's what you knew. It's what was required, necessary.
It was table stakes, right? So it wasn't like I didn't recognize at the time, right, that it was super different, right? The other component is I took getting accepted to the MBA, I took it back to Nestle and I said, look, I'm getting an MBA. And they're like, well, you didn't get it yet. I'm like, so? Like, I'm there, like, give me an opportunity. And so they interviewed me and I got the job just from having applied, which was great. And then once I was in, right, Pepsi then came and recruited me away from Nestle. I worked in innovation on naked juice and coconut water. But because I was in marketing, they didn't care if I had an MBA and they brought me across, right? And so kind of a snowball effect.
Oh my word. Now, the secret component though to this stage in your life is there's a girl involved now, right? Through this MBA, like she's with you.
So the MBA, yep. So my girlfriend essentially moved back to LA. She started going to culinary school. So she was entrenched in culinary school and kind of her work, right? So she was pursuing her stuff, I was pursuing my stuff, and we kind of found time in the middle for each other, right? And so bluntly, that's part of the reason the relationship worked, right? Like I can't imagine having a girlfriend at Yale playing soccer, doing academics. The time requirement for all of it wouldn't have been successful. And so it allowed us to grow independently as well as together throughout those years and kind of discover what's important to each of us. And that carried through a little bit, right, while she was doing culinary school right afterwards. So yes, now there's a girl involved, right, or always has been, but is more involved, right, not distracted as much in the same city, starting to move forward. The weekends were challenging, right? And quite frankly, she helped me get through most of that, because I needed emotional support from somewhere, and that's always been her, right? She's always been that rock that has continued to give me a foundation and keep me moving forward and support me to go do all of these crazy, amazing things on the outside, but huge sacrifices, internally.
Yeah.
And so the next big sacrifice that we talked about is when I graduated MBA, I joined a program at T-Mobile that was designed to move you every 9 months. And when I say move you different states. So we started to embark on this journey. We started in Colorado Springs, Denver, and then I was flying to Sacramento, Utah every single week. And then from there, we moved up to Seattle. And it was at this time that my wife was starting to explore different things, right? She didn't work during that time, during our first move. And it was a rough time for her, right? Because she's a trailing spouse in a new environment, no friends, no family, doesn't know what to do. Fortunately, on the first move, she had a roommate from college that actually moved to the same city. And so she spent tons of time with her, and that was okay. At the second move, she got a part-time job, and that gave her something. But she started to question. She's like, okay, we said we're going to do 3 years. We're 3 years, right? Because it was going to be 3 or 4 rotations. You get promoted, you get put at headquarters. And she would notice that I would get restless. About month 9, I would get restless. And I'm getting restless because I had already understood what needed to be done for a given job function. I was already executing on it, and I was clamoring for more, because more meant the next step, promotion, right? And whether it was lateral, diagonal, or, just straight vertical, was like, okay, it doesn't matter.
Achieve, go.
Achieve, right? The other thing that I did along the way is I knew I wanted to be a CEO, right? Because if you're bound to achieve, then you've got to run everything. And so to run everything, I took an unconventional route, right? Where I did procurement, I did marketing, I did call center, I did operations, right? I did sales, I did general management, and it was all to set myself up to essentially be CEO. Coming out of when I was at Nestle, I had an opportunity to essentially go be an expat in China, and took my wife over there. We spent some time. Ultimately, we decided not to go, that was a big sacrifice to me, because it was somewhere I wanted to be. It's where a lot of my heritage I identify with is there. But my wife is 5'11", blonde, white, in China, you stick out like a sore thumb, and they don't speak English, right? And so you basically got an expat community. You've got heavily polluted. She's a chef. They don't have a lot of fresh produce, and in the cities where I would be, right? And it didn't make sense. And the other thing is the level I was going at was going to be too low to be meaningfully impactful to my career, to accelerate it the way it needed to go, right? It would have been, at that manager level, you're not getting the acceleration, the visibility you need, right? You needed to be, more of that director level. And so it was like, okay, let's hold off and reevaluate in the future. And so I was okay letting it go because it didn't align with my business at the time, but there was this personal thing that was starting to pull. And once we were with T-Mobile and we started moving, right, one of the questions she would ask me is like, when's it going to stop? And I go, what do you mean? She goes,
critical question.
Well, when you get promoted every time, you work more. You're working longer hours, you figure it out, and then you start working less. But as soon as you start working less, you get bored, and then you want to go do more. And so you either take on more responsibilities, or you move, or you get promoted. And it was like, 3 years, that's what we've planned, and so she was like, okay, and from her mind, it was, okay, I signed up for this, I understand. But there were little droplets right along the way that were like, hey, can't do this forever, right? That's what she was communicating.
And let me just dig into that a little bit, especially because we have so many women in the room that are kind of watching this, and she's the character we are most fascinated by. in this story, because it's true that she's supporting you through this. It's true that she knows that this is what it takes. And yet there are these hints of saying, gosh, like achieve here on the business level. What about achieving here emotionally? You and I, like this whole idea of she wants to be with you. I mean, really, that's the bottom line, right? She wants to feel settled. She wants to build a life with you, that kind of feeling. And so how aware do you feel like you felt? Because I imagine with the way you grew up that it was kind of hard to crack that shell of just, well, I meant to achieve, and that's why you'll love me, and that's why you'll want to be with me, and all those things. And is she really responsible for kind of cracking you open to say, look, there's more to you? And I know it's a really personal question. Welcome to how I interview, but just curious, her role in this.
She's a saint.
We'll have her on next. I'm excited.
A lot of this I've unpacked with my coach fairly recently. And the way I described it to my coach was up until really recently, I would take my emotions, I would put it in a box, and I would stuff that box way down. It wasn't important to me. It wasn't relevant, and I couldn't engage on an emotional level. In fact, most of the times that I had conflict in my relationships was because someone was coming at me with an emotional need and I couldn't comprehend it because I wasn't wired emotionally, right? And so I miss emotional cues all day long. Still a blind spot for me because for most of my career, I haven't exercised that skill, right? It's one I'm very deficient in.
Which, however, allowed you to be a really good, probably a quick decision maker, because you could logically look at pros and cons and just go instead of getting wrapped in.
Very much so. Cool. I can make very quick decisions on limited information, right, with what we've got, and kind of forecast what the implications of that are, right? And I'm agnostic to the emotional component, right? So hard decisions that need to be made are much easier for me because that emotional pull, right, hasn't been there as much. As most others, right? So to your question, Rachel's my wife, and I started dating in high school. Her spending time at my family in high school was traumatic for her because she was subjected to, right, the same sort of parenting that I was used to, and it was the opposite end of the spectrum for her, right? And so when she goes, hey, I'm going to East Tennessee, and my dad and my mom were basically like, is that an Ivy League school? Like, where's that? What? And it's just like treated almost as subconsciously, right? I don't hold it against my parents, right? But it was challenging for her, right? And then to have me not have that emotional connection. I think she's seen me cry twice in my life. Right. Wow. Very little, right? So that emotional connection just it's something I'm working on. She helped me recognize bits and pieces along the way, right? But it really took me sitting down and being introspective and working with outside people, right, who weren't in my network, largely my coaches, right, to start unpacking some of that, right? And taking away the assumption that a man has to, control all of their emotions, has to be strong, right? Can't show anything, and starting to explore some of that, right? Which is for all the women, like, how could you live without having I don't know, right? Like, I am starting to explore that, and we're
going to do a follow-up with him, and he can tell us. Well, and I think it's so funny too, because sitting from my seat is sometimes I look at that and I'm like, man, I wish I could be a faster decision maker, or trust myself more, or be less connected with the outcome, and just move at a faster pace, because I am higher on the emotion scale than you are. And so I bring in all these things of like, well, if I take on this client, okay, how many less hours per week is that with my 3-year-old, right? And am I willing to do that? And is she gonna like talk to a therapist when she's 30 because her mom worked an extra hour a week? And like, I mean, that's where my emotions go. And you are like, you are crazy. You are crazy when you hear that, right?
I can't comprehend, right? Like, I don't understand that thought process, right? Because it's not based on logic, it's based on emotion, right? And
Right.
so that's a new skill that I am leaning into, right? In terms of understanding those emotional pieces.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I need them to be a more effective leader, right?
Mm,
I also understand it's a blind spot. And so I complement that with other people on my, leadership team that can fill that void, right? But
I love that.
there's definitely a component of me that needs to understand that, right? So now if I've got someone on the leadership team that helps me lead that way, that person who happens to be a female needs me to
Shocking.
recognize, I know, well, surprise, needs me to recognize some of those emotional components that she has sometimes, right? And it's like, oh, got it. Okay. And so I constantly am finding myself pausing, reflecting, right? Like, okay, I need to slow down. I need to tie into that emotional need, right? In a more
Yeah.
impactful, meaningful way, right? So um, I am by no means good on that emotional. And my wife and I Rachel and I are still exploring what that looks like.
Welcome to marriage. Welcome
And
to
how
marriage.
yeah, very much so. And it's good and it's in a healthy way, right? And so I'm thankful for that. I'm glad we got to this point, and we didn't just kind of persevere, so to speak, through things.
Survive. Yeah.
I think,
Well, and let me ask you a question. I mean, it's kind of as we're looking at your story and we talk about, Nestle and Pepsi and Colorado Springs and moving every 9 months and T-Mobile and all this kind of stuff and hints of her starting to, hey, like, when is this going to end? When is this hustle going to end? When is this grind going to end? And you start looking at this balance in between emotional decisions and logical decisions. What do you think, as you look back, would you say that your decision for spoiler alert, he is no longer corporate, people who are listening. Spoiler alert. Okay. I think you knew that from the title of the interview. He is no longer corporate. So, Liam, as you look at that, do you consider that to have been a logical decision or an emotional decision?
both.
Bravo.
So the emotional piece came from, right? Obviously, she's been asking me, the biggest question she asked me came when we had completed the time at T-Mobile in terms of what those rotations, and they turned around and said, you're moving to Cleveland or you're moving to Baltimore. And we were like, whoa, like our family's all West Coast, right? And we're like,
Yeah.
we're supposed to be in Seattle. That's what we talked about. We've got some extended family here. And so I had that conversation with Rachel, and her response was, well, do you want to have kids? I was like, excuse me? Like, kids was always like the end goal. And like, I saw myself at the time as
Logically, yes. I want to
yeah,
have kids, right?
duh, isn't that on everyone's
Check the
plan?
box.
Um,
Oh, Liam, I'm dying.
well, and dad was born and raised in Hong Kong, right? So this idea of passing lineage of name
Huge.
and culture, like, massive, right? So it was like, duh. And then the follow-up question was, well, what kind of father do you want to be? I'm like, what do you mean? I'm going to be an amazing father. She goes, how? You're working, you're not here, you're traveling. And it was just like, oh, knife to the heart, right? And so that got my wheels turning. And that was the catalyst for like, okay, she's serious. If I want this relationship to continue, right, like, changes have to be made, right? So that was the emotional pull. As I looked at the logical side, I started to look at those people in the jobs that I was going after, right? So if I wanted to be a multinational CEO, top 100, what does their life look like? Well, two of the most prominent that have been in the news lately, right? Gates and Bezos, like, clearly something wasn't working out, and
Failed
they either
marriages.
persevered or they made it work, or they powered through, right? Like, all of these euphemisms for something is completely effed up, and we're going to put a band-aid over it while we move towards whatever the goal is to succeed. And it was like, one of my brother's best friends was the CEO of Disney, and he was running all of Japan. So he's in Japan, his kids and family are here. His kid goes to school. The kid is just messed up beyond belief, through no fault of his own, right? Drugs, alcohol, no self-identity. And it was like, is that what I want my kids to look like? Right. So it got me thinking of like, and then I was like, okay, is there a CEO that actually has a good balance and is a good family man? And I was like, if there is, I can't find them. Not in
Oh,
that
so smart.
echelon, right? Like of being in the top 100. And then I started to flip it and say, okay, I know a lot of entrepreneurs, people who not known to the greater public, millionaires, having fabulous, wonderful lives. And it was like, huh. And so that got me thinking, like, I've always said I want to be the biggest and best on the global scale. What if we change that and said, what if I worked on the local scale? And then, quite frankly, I'm competing against mom and pops, and I've got an exceptional pedigree. I'm well trained from all the biggest corporations in the world. Like the probability of success goes way up in terms of what that looks like. And so then I custom designed essentially what a business would look like. That there were a couple things. One, it needed to be local. I didn't want a big national conglomerate to be able to come in and take over. Had to be relationship based. Part of what I was getting fatigued at in the corporate world was managing my own career, watching my back, playing politics, aligning with people that maybe didn't have the same benefit or not the same values or outlook that I did. So relationships. The local piece was also, I wanted to be an active part of the community and give back, right? So I grew up in the church, being able to give back, being able to be part of the community. Like that is really hard to do when you're moving 9 months to a different city or
Really
you're
hard.
on a plane all the time. Like how can you actually be part of the community? And so that was a component. And then the logic side of me is, hey, I wanted a business that would grow logarithmically without a one-to-one relationship with labor. I didn't want it to be labor-based. And so that led me into financial services sector. But
Okay.
definitely a logical and emotional component to say, like, you don't want your life to be like that. Well, you got to make some changes.
This is where it gets really fun. This is where it gets really fun. So I want to just highlight the process that I'm hearing from you and bring it into perspective for some of our listeners. What, you know, when Liam was talking about like building a business from the very, very beginning so that it can grow without, like, not every dollar is associated with every hour that you spend in the business, right? With labor. And so we talk about, you know, scalability, and we talk about the value ladder here. We do all these things to help instigate that. And I really want to highlight that, yeah, that's true. That's what Liam's done. That's what I've done. That's what so many of our guests, that is the pattern that they're following. And that is why they're talking to you and why they're here. The reality is, though, is that the reason this gets talked about over and over and over, that don't build a business that you have to show up for every single dollar for, is the following reason. Number one, you have a marriage and you have a family. And that kid is going to barf at school one day, and you're going to want to be able to still make money and take a couple of days off, or you're going to crash with COVID, or you're going to have something happen where you have a life that is going to bring something unexpected in. And the business shouldn't crash and fall. My big lesson in that is when I gave birth to my fourth child, my business burned to the ground nearly because I was gone for 2 weeks. That is a disaster. That is a disaster. And the reason that Liam and Ryan and me and Katie and like all these people that we're bringing in to talk about this, the reason it's so important is because if we so often hear entrepreneurs say the phrase that Rachel, Liam's wife or girlfriend at the time, or maybe wife at the time, was saying, when is it going to stop? Meaning, oh, I'm just going to hustle and grind the business to this point, and then I will scale it. Or I'm just going to, you know, coach one-on-one until it hits this point, and then I'm going to scale it and do all this kind of stuff. And the reality is the greatest successes that we have seen have been those from the very beginning who have decided from day one, I'm going to decide to be involved in my community or my kids' school. I'm going to decide that I have flexibility on my weekends all the time. I'm going to design products and services that do not require me to be on the phone 24/7, or that don't require me to show up live, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to add my like rah-rah moment to you of what you are saying, that Liam did it the smart way. Yeah, he did it the crazy risky way, saying I'm leaving this, right? And I admire you for it. I mean, that's why you're sitting here. I think that is so incredibly brave. And I'm like, would I have been able to do it? would I have been able to do it? Maybe if they told me to move to Baltimore kind of scares me. So I'm to raise kids in, I don't know.
Yeah.
My family's not there. So, a lot of those things are really brave oriented, but I just want to add to that Liam did it right. Has he made mistakes in the process? Probably. And he's learning and he's growing. In fact, he had a client this morning that was kind of a train wreck and all sorts of stuff, but but the reality is he was very, very intentional on what that shift looked like. Okay. And I want to present a scenario to you, Liam, and get your kind of advice or perspective on this. I think it's a really, really common clickbait phrase to be like, well, today I decided to quit my 9 to 5 and just start this thing from scratch. Right. And they literally pull all security. They empty all of their savings to go into a business stream, and they don't start it right. That it's kind of this coined phrase that I'm just going to leave my 9 to 5 right now. And I want you to see Liam's kind of example that he's shown here, that he was hugely intentional about what it was going to look like, what it was going to prioritize, what it was going to look like for Rachel, how it was going to support him in becoming a father. And do we take the time to do that early on in our businesses to help it become what it can become? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so to tie it to my example, right, I was fortunate in the position that I was in with T-Mobile, right? I was effectively at a director level, was well compensated, and they covered all my living expenses. So we were stocking money away, right? And we were very conscientious of putting that towards investment, right? We didn't change our lifestyle or increase our costs as that was going up, right? Granted, much easier to do when you've got two people, in their late 20s, right?
Sure.
Then you're grounded, you've got a house, you've got kids, etc. But that helped enable that move, right? Setting up those investment principles and doing it design, right? Helped facilitate taking that jump, right? And knowing that, hey, I had time. I had in our conversations, right? I had 2 years. 2 years, I didn't have to make a penny. And if it didn't work, I've got a good pedigree. I can go back and I can get a job and we'll be just fine, right? And so that intentional design of what the company wanted to look like started well before, right? And just setting up the foundation, right, from an investment standpoint. But yeah, you can't, I think what you're talking about with the click, like it's a bunch of BS to me, right? Like you can't just come up with the idea and know exactly, or have someone put something in and it's like, okay, this is the thing, I'm going to go jump, right? It doesn't make sense, right? And it's very challenging to go build that business. And what does it look like?
Yeah, well, and even to add to that, Liam, that if you decide to do that, like I remember about 6 months ago, I had a client say, okay, well, I want to start working with you, and my husband really wants to support me through that process. And so he's actually going to quit his job, and we're going to take all of our savings and we're going to put it towards your coaching, and let's do this. And I was like, no, oh my gosh, no. Okay. Like, oh my gosh, no. How about we hire a babysitter for 6 hours a week and build this step by step the right way, for many, many reasons, but also for the reason of pressure. Meaning, do you know how poorly you operate as a human when you are frantic and stressed and your kids aren't going to be able to eat in 6 days? I mean, those are the kind of scenarios a lot of these stories are putting out there. And what you said, you're like, I think it's BS. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing. That's kind of what we're seeing. And so I just wanting to highlight your intentional nature.
I think the other component for women and moms in particular, right, is the MLM pull, right, is so much more prominent in the, hey, start a side hustle, right? And you can do it a little bit and you can grow in and then it will be a business. It's like, those take a massive amount of work. You're creating your own business and your own book, right? And what does that look like? How do you provide that structure, right? That it is its own company to do really well, right? It played a role for Rachel where it helped her, get through some postpartum. And so that part was excellent. But she wasn't able to build a business out of it, right? That idea of like, hey, I'm going to supplement income and it'll work, and just going, right? And that clickbait mentality, right? Didn't pan out the way she expected because there's so many different components that go into it. And it wasn't it wasn't this opportunity fits what I want. It was this opportunity is in front of me. Let me go chase it. Right. And I think that is a key distinction to make, right? The people who are very successful, right? I've heard a quote from Buffett, and I'm going to butcher it, right? But they're successful because they say no, right? They see so many opportunities that they're successful because they say no to a lot of bad ones, and they're uber selective in finding the good ones. They've got a set of criteria, right? They know exactly what it wants to look like, right? And if you take that time on the front end to purpose-built design it, you're going to be a lot more successful in finding the winner, right? And not have to put yourself through the pain and suffering, right, associated with figuring it out or paying your dues, right? Or whatever that is along the way.
Right. It's like one of the biggest business lies, I think. And this is coming from an MBA, people, that like the whole like, it'll stop when, or just pay your dues until when. I've seen, my husband's in the medical field. I see that in the medical field too. It's just pay your time. You know, I had to do it. You had to do it. And I think technology and really smart people have actually really started to shift the culture of business, that you can really excel in business when you're intentional. You don't even have to be smart. You have to be surrounded by the people who are really smart, right? And intentional and saying no to those things, right? And it's just like you would say no to certain things. I would say no to a Friday interview or a Friday speaking engagement. I don't care if they're going to fly me to Boston, right? That happened like 7 weeks ago. They want to fly me to Boston. And I said, can I bring my family? They said no. And I said, I'm out. Sorry, I don't work Fridays unless I'm with my family, you know, kind of a thing. And that may seem maybe small on your scale. That's huge for me. The ability to just be able to say, well, if they can't come, then I'm out, you know, and to be able to say those no's starting now, because there's nothing about 6 figures or multiple 6 figures or even your first 7 figures that is going to make you better at setting boundaries. There's nothing about that income level that's going to make you better at that.
So through most of my career, I had no boundaries, right? It was chase the opportunity, right? So if something like that comes up, it was like, great, I'll figure it out. Let's add it to the plate, right? And so the ability to establish those boundaries early is super critical, right? Otherwise, you're going to be compromising those things that you value, not intentionally, right? But just because they're going to continue to chip away and chip away and chip away, right? Until there's nothing left there, right? And so starting from a place, right? And I wish I had done it even deeper than what we're articulating here, right? But like, what are those non-negotiables, right? Is it 40 hours a week? Is it 16 hours a week? What does that look like, right? And then that will help determine. Some businesses, there's no way that's feasible, right? In which case that's it makes that no easy, right? And that conversation of like, hey, I'm sorry, it doesn't fit with what I'm looking for, right? Nothing against you, wish you luck, right? You know, mom, dad, uncle, whoever's bringing that opportunity, right? And it's, you know, I'm just clear on what I want and where I'm headed, and it makes things so much easier.
Oh, I love this. I love this. So I thank you for being so open about your story. And now that we've gotten into this world of like your shift, right? Your shift, and also your courage, I guess is maybe a really good word to use, on trying to really bring in logical decisions and emotional decisions, and really you want to be the dad you want to be, and letting that business support the kind of dad that you want to be. I actually want to dive into your business for a minute. Okay. So you guys, Liam is an investor, is probably what I would tell him, but it's like DML Capital. Am I getting the name right?
Yep.
Okay. Is the name of the business. And I don't want to say the word investor and have you all be like, see you, Sarah, we're out. Okay. Like, that's not what I do. That my husband kind of does that. But what I'd like for you to show us, Liam, just in our last 5 minutes, is to give people an introduction of how they can start treating their money and or money mindset in those habitually beautiful ways, so that as the income increases, they will have the maturity to save. They will have the maturity to invest. Like, what are some of the errors that you see early on in the journey of entrepreneurs as they're building, that kind of make you shake your head, that you wish you could speak some wisdom to?
Yeah. So I would say the first thing in terms of the gender differences, one of the things that Rachel and I are doing, right, like is I'm trying to get her up to speed on, at least the key decisions and where the money is and where things are moving and why we're doing what we're doing. Because there's a possibility I'm not here, right? And if I'm not here,
Awesome.
like she's got to know at least something to carry it forward, right? Otherwise it's going to fall on itself, right? So I used to be part of that. That's the model that was there for me in my upbringing, right? My dad did all of that. My mom didn't know, right? And trying to change that. I think a couple fallacies on the entrepreneurial side, right? One is investing everything back into the business, right? Not taking anything personally, right? This was another purpose-built design thing, right? The business needed to be profitable, right? And before we grew or we brought more people on, there had to be profit there to support it, right? If there's no profit, how are you going to support it? If you say out of savings and then we're going to go grow the company, it's like, okay, are you raising funds, right? Like, are you going to get VC capital? Because if you're not, probably not a good way to go about it, right? Like you've got to know exactly what that return is going to look like for time or investment, right? And that in itself, that's an investment, right? You're making a financial choice of where the money flows and why you put it there, right? And so I think from be
equally engaged with the spouse on what the money is doing.
Yep. I think that's a big component. And then when you're looking at the business, right, where are you putting the money and where are you investing and are you getting that return, right? Entrepreneurs tend to use the cash in the bank, right, as the guiding factor of how well you're doing, right? The more money in the bank, right, the more successful you're being. Oftentimes it doesn't account for your salary, it doesn't account for taxes, right? It doesn't account for a lot of different components that then whittle that number down, or you get surprised in a subsequent year, right? And so I think having some, again, boundaries, right? In terms of how are you going to take that money, where are you going to put it, right? Budgeting on the personal side, right? Like what's that number that you're comfortable with on a monthly basis? 10 grand, 15 grand, 20 grand, doesn't matter what the number is, right? But build some structure around not exceeding where that number goes, right? That way you can start planning, right? And from a personal investment standpoint, my goal is to generate income, passive income, where I don't have to be involved, right? So it can't be from the business if I'm involved in the business, right? It either has to come from real estate or dividend stocks or interest bonds, right? What are those things that the passive income will equal or offset what that monthly expense piece is? So if it's 10 grand and now I've got 10 grand in income, well, everything I'm doing in the business is now extra, right? And it is a fancy vacation. It is, an investment into buying more property. It is investment back to the company, right? Like what are those components that then come after you've established the foundation, right? I think too often people are chasing cars, houses, bigger business, right? More success. All the business, all the money gets sunk in, right? And if you were to truly take a step back and look at it, it's like, are you getting the return there that you should be? Answers typically no, and that leads to, a pretty large failure rate in business.
This is really so helpful because it brings back again the same dynamic of like, when are we going to start being smart about it, right? Because if anybody's taken a finance class, I just did like a family finance class at BYU. That's like probably the only finance class I've ever taken. And I remember studying the time value of money, very, very basic things about the time value of money. And I've never forgotten it. And so those of you listening today who are like, I don't know where the money is going in the business, that's probably, to be blunt, the worst approach, right? It's better to just face the ugly and say, wow, I haven't paid myself in 2 years. Okay, we'll face it. Let's like write it down. Let's look at it. Let's do this. And really getting into a space where it's like, again, intention, that I have intention with what I'm doing. This is supporting the things that I want to do. Because Liam, I think sometimes I hear about this, like these dividends that come in and it's passive income, and it can feel so like, oh, that's for the millionaire. And it's like, no, that's for like the early entrepreneur who is facing it, who's looking at the dragon in the face, so to speak, right? And is willing to look at it.
My first investment, I think, was like $200 of cash flow a month, right? Like you look at 200 versus 10 grand, like it's nothing. And it can feel inconsequential, right? If you don't have a plan in terms of how that builds, right? But you get a couple more of those, right? And now you're into several thousand and you keep building, right? And you get there over time, right? You're not going to get there with one fell swoop typically.
Well, and my listeners here, I know that we're wrapping up really close here on time. For my listeners, I talked with Liam privately before our interview today, and he is willing to come in and sort of give us a foundational approach to investing and not making that such a scary male word. Okay, right? To my listeners, that this can become a word where it's like, oh, I can be part of this, or oh, seriously, I can do something with $200 a month. Like he has agreed to come back. It'll probably be in the fall and actually give us a formal training about what that looks like. For those of you who feel like, hey, I've got the 10 grand a month to invest, or I've got the 5 grand a month to invest. I've also gotten permission from Liam to be able to give you his personal information. He's about relationships, remember? And so there are ways and you can connect with him directly if you're like, I kind of want to talk about the $10,000 a month investment, or I kind of want to look and see what this looks like to move forward. I would highly recommend that you connect with him personally. He's very responsive. He's on top of it. Just as part of the V2 marketing group, be kind to him. We believe in integrity and kindness here. So you can find him on LinkedIn.com, and you can find him at Liam Leonard, LiamLeonard. And if you want to email him, it is liam.leonard@dmlcap.com. We'll go ahead and put that in the show notes of the podcast, as well as the live here that we're doing in the Facebook group. So Liam, any parting words for these amazing women who have been able to learn from your story? I'm just so grateful you'd spend our time with us.
I would say 2 things. For those who want more on the profit side, there's a book called Profit First by Michael Michalowicz. That's a good starting point in terms of setting up structure and boundaries. The second would be patient with us men who don't understand emotions. It's not intentional. I've got no idea, but I'm getting better. And I'm sure some of you are like, that's my spouse. So be patient. They'll get there.
I love it. I'm like, I secretly want to meet Rachel. I want to see the woman that is side by side with you as you build this. But I'm super grateful for your wisdom, grateful for your time. I'm grateful for your willingness to come back and teach our people as well, and just keep moving forward with the extraordinary impact that you're having. And I look forward to seeing where it takes you and Rachel and your family. And we are cheering you on every step of the way.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for being part of Victress Global. If learning to be brilliant at marketing, a 12-hour work week, Fridays off, a commitment to family, faith, and business is what you're aiming for, I'd like to personally invite you to meet other V2 marketers just like you. Search for V2 Marketing on Facebook and join us for live trainings every single week. As always, if you love what you learned here, share it. This podcast is possible because of awesome entrepreneurs like you.